Hi, greetings. This is Jan Spencer in Eugene, Oregon, and I would like to share the most recent bit of research and writing and slideshow creation in a series I call A Primer for Paradigm Shift. So let's go to what we have to look at today. Here we are. A primer for paradigm shift. This is the 10th part of the primer. It's social engineering, the consumer culture, and U.S. foreign policy. So just a little quick review here. These are all previous articles and productions for a primer for paradigm shift. All of these I have on YouTube, and you can, for one, you can pause this presentation anytime you like. But these are the links to all these YouTube critique of capitalism, aspects, principles, and foundations of paradigm shift. Uh, I would just briefly comment on the paradigm shift. I am turning these articles into a book, unknown publication date, but at some point, probably in 2025. It's just such fascinating and empowering information as well. By far, most of the primer is how do we engage in paradigm shift. Sure, we have to have a bit of criticism of capitalism and the consumer culture, and actually today's production is a criticism of the consumer culture and capitalism. But by far, most of the primer is about how do we engage in paradigm shift in our own homes, our own lives, our own neighborhoods. This is more grassroots uh, oriented. I am all for people engaging in creating alternatives to the current system in whatever way attracts them. My particular interest is more at the grassroots because you don't need any permission. You don't need to wait to engage in paradigm shift. Paradigm shift is not some rainbow bird chirping condition in the future. It's right now if you want it to be. And part of my favorite part of the primer is real life examples of paradigm shift, people already engaging in paradigm shift in all kinds of different ways. It's urban land use, it's social, it's economic, it's uh, many wonderful examples of people already engaging in paradigm shift. They're pointing the way to a preferred future. And even at the grassroots level, the more people engaging, creating alternatives, they're going to start bumping into each other and increasing the scale of paradigm shift. And of course, the goal is to replace capitalism and the consumer culture. Do we have time to do that? Who knows? But the more people taking these initiatives and making these changes in their own lives, in the lives of people around them, the more people doing that, the better. Uh, of course, I have this quote from myself: we don't need to wait to experience many of the benefits of paradigm shift. How do we prioritize our own time and money? But I go into those topics in different parts of the primer. So what I would like to do is just go over a few of the kind of sound bites of the primer that I've accumulated over this period of time. I've been interested in these topics and issues actually since high school. in college. So activism is something that I've been engaged in my entire life. I would say my interests are a convergence of uh, urban land use, care for the natural world, economics, permaculture, and social uplift. To me, paradigm shift is 50% the environment. We just have to live within the boundaries of the natural world. And 50% is the social. How can we uplift our individual and collective spirits? That's just as important. And the two of those, the environment and the social, they go together really, really well. So just a couple addressing the economic malpractice of capitalism addresses many social, political, economic, and ecological problems all at the same time. Capitalism is a common denominator of overconsumption of practically every major problem. And so many of these issues and problems are avoidable, but they're very uh, profitable, and that's why we have them. Um, we have a mass movement in waiting. Virtually every progressive organization and movement exists to repair and address the damage caused by capitalism and the consumer culture. That means virtually all these nonprofits, ad hoc organizations, social movements are on the same team. And the more we recognize and act upon that we all have common cause, the better off we're going to be. That's why I call this a mass movement in waiting. All we need is to recognize and make those initiatives to work more with each other for a preferred future. And of course, paradigm shift ideas that you might hear uh, on my primer and other sources may sound way out there on the edge at the current time, but historical trends are moving us in a direction that what sounds really out there at the present in terms of reducing ecological footprints, building social community culture, like I mentioned before, prioritizing our own time and money, those ideas are going to sound more and more reasonable and desirable as time goes on. I am certain that we're going to experience that. And of course, there are already untold hundreds of thousands of people all over the country and all over the world already engaging in paradigm shift. This is not an isolated phenomena. I have friends here within 5-minute bike ride of my home here in Eugene who are totally into all of the things I'm talking about right here. So social engineering, the consumer culture, and U.S. foreign policy. This is some recent research and reading that I've done, and it's kind of brought a number of interests together. And I felt really compelled to uh, add this as a chapter in the book and create this YouTube presentation to share these ideas. Uh, I would not really claim any really new thinking here, but I'm bringing some different elements together that I think are very much worth knowing about. When we have more of an idea of the source and the cause of our challenges and problems, I think that gives us more of an idea of what to do about them. So I have a lot of text in this presentation. I'm not going to read everything. Everything that I have written in this presentation is in an article uh, on Resilience Magazine. That's the Post-Carbon Institute's Resilience Magazine. You can go there, do a search, and you can find other articles that I've written on resilience magazine as well, and a lot of other good content there too. So what I'm going to do here is that entire article appears in this presentation. I'm going to read a little bit of it. I'm not going to read all of it. And what you can do here on YouTube is you have the privilege of pausing at any time you want. You can listen to what I have to say, or you can pause me and read it on your own. Either way, I strongly encourage that you have a good look at this content. It's just very, very interesting and answers to me a lot of the questions. Where did the consumer culture come from, and why do we have this, and whose idea was it, and how does it affect our lives, our worldviews, our society, and the condition of the natural world? There's lots of things that come together. So I will read some of this. And again, you can pause and go at your own rate and read the entire article here. I have some graphics that do a little bit of useful show and tell as well. So let's just move along here. I want to read this. Keep in mind during this presentation, the consumer culture exists to keep the public distracted and dumbed down, to minimize its interference with the work and privilege of the owners and managers of the economy and the political system. U.S. foreign policy and its immense military are the enforcers of U.S. self-interest to protect commerce, to keep the goods flowing and to keep them cheap, the key to public distraction via overconsumption, and to protect economic and geopolitical interests. This, these couple of items right here will become more clear as we proceed with this presentation, and maybe you know a lot of this anyway. And if you do, I hope you do, and I hope you also share in a cautious and careful way, share this information with other people too. Uh, when we learn ideas and have experience about creating a preferred future, we can't keep that information to ourselves, but how we share it and present it to other people will have a lot to do with how effective and successful we are with creating alternatives to capitalism and the consumer culture. Okay, social engineering, the consumer culture, and U.S. foreign policy. This article will explore the term social engineering, also known as manufactured consent, a term from Noam Chomsky. Our lives are dominated by buying, selling, and consuming. Many of our most intractable problems, social, personal, economic, environmental, public health, and political, are intimately connected to what we call the consumer culture. When we better understand how a problem was created, we can better understand how to move past it. The consumer culture is a big problem. Paradigm shift is the movement towards healthy alternatives to the consumer culture for the good of people and planet. Yeah, I mentioned that I have a number of articles that are all on they're on YouTube and Resilience Magazine, and they are going to be turned into a book. I'm working on that. The primer contains a powerful deconstruction of capitalism, but by far most of the primer contains practical information about what people can do in their own homes, lives, neighborhoods, and communities. No permission needed to engage in paradigm shift and to begin enjoying the benefits of paradigm shift as well. I know I experienced that here on my quarter-acre suburban permaculture property. I enjoy the benefits of paradigm shift every day because, in a sense, my property here is living in the future. I know what it's like to enjoy many of the benefits of what can suburbia offer to us. I'm doing it right here for 25 years. Virtually every progressive organization and movement exists to repair some kind of social, economic, or ecological damage caused by capitalism and the consumer culture. When we realize and act on that common sense, the scale of paradigm shift can expand rapidly and greatly. That's what I mentioned when we realize we're on the same team. This article explores social engineering. Social engineering, from using that term in this article, social engineering is when a small group of people advance their own interests by using widespread, you could say, industrial scale messaging that goes out to large numbers of people with the purpose to influence and shape their thinking, beliefs, values, and decision making. Does that sound familiar? Economic, political, and social stability, as we will see described by Edward Bernays, Walter Lippman, and others, depends on a constant flow of products and messaging to keep the masses happy and distracted. Noam Chomsky uses the term manufactured consent. Ralph Nader uses the term growing up corporate. Modern social influencing, also known as social engineering, started generations ago. Actually, that's very surprising. The early days of the consumer culture uh, date back close to 100 years, or depending upon how you want to define it, even further back than that. People have been materialistic and kind of a little on the greedy side going back uh, millennia. But should humans be making progress somehow? I think so. Lots of stuff is remarkably effective bait. The consumer culture is bait that facilitates social engineering. As individuals, we have been on the receiving end of many, many thousands of advertisements throughout our lives. The news does little to question the consumer culture and overconsumption. Rather, the news, including such favorites as the New York Times, which I subscribe to and I read a lot in the New York Times, CNN, and even The Guardian, they are to a large degree part of the social engineering themselves. Of course, all that messaging is to create wants and for people to aspire to have all that stuff. All that messaging reminds us that the American way, the American dream, manifest destiny, um, these messages underline and encourage the thinking that we live in the best society there is. Capitalism and the consumer culture is the ultimate in a human destiny. Uh, I would disagree with a lot of that. So where did a lot of these ideas come from? We're about ready to take a little closer look. Yeah, the consumer culture is not an accident. It is a manufactured set of conditions by certain interests for bringing about certain social, economic, and political outcomes by using certain tactics that focus on teaching people that buying, consuming, and manifesting one's own vanity is a primary purpose of life. The consumer culture is that social engineering made visible. We live in it. We've immersed in this consumer culture. Most people participate and consent in this manufactured condition without even thinking about it or knowing it. The consumer's culture is self-reinforcing as long as the goods keep flowing and affordable. Yeah, it's a little bit like a person dependent on, of course, drugs. You kind of can function sort of as long as you have the supply. And our consumer culture is subject to that same dynamic. That's why the military exists to enforce the flow. But we'll get to that. We're finding the consumer culture is not sustainable. And from this perspective, it's not even desirable in the first place for many social and even spiritual reasons as well. This social engineering depends on replacing positive human potential and social uplift with vanity and excess consumption of energy and resources. The consumer culture is ruining the planet. And of course, the United States is not alone either. But if you're acquainted with eco footprints, then you know the United States, the average American has uh, the largest ecological footprint in the world, except for maybe a couple of wealthy Persian Gulf sheikdoms. Americans are known for their cars and suburbia. You don't see so much of American lifestyle in other parts of the world. I've traveled a lot, and the freeways and the cars and the suburbia, it does exist in a lot of other places. Interestingly, most of them English speaking, but the degree of cars, the size, how much they're used, the footprint of the average American is the largest in the world in comparison to other countries. Chomsky makes reference to author and intellectual Edward Bernays, often referred to as the father of public relations. um, Bernays wrote a seminal book named Propaganda in the late 1920s. Also important in this article is reference to Walter Lippmann, a journalist and social commentator, and he was a contemporary of Bernays. Both were well-known figures through the 20s, into the 60s, and even later. Both Lippmann and Bernays shared many opinions about society, politics, economics, and how to manage politics and economics and society. That's what their interest was. Chomsky explains how both Lippmann and Bernays define the roles of two basic groups of society. The first group is small in number. Chomsky begins with a quote from Bernays, and I take this from an article I read by Noam Chomsky in Z magazine in the early 1990s. And Chomsky is explaining the consumer culture. He is explaining social engineering, manufactured consent. Who can do better than Noam Chomsky to connect the dots? So Chomsky is referring to Bernays and to Walter Lippmann. So this is what Chomsky says about Bernays. Bernays quotes, "The conscious, intelligent manipulation of the organized opinions and behavior of the masses is an important element in democratic society." Again, this is what Bernays is saying. It is the intelligent minorities that need to make use of propaganda continuously and systematically. Chomsky comments, it follows that two political roles need to be clearly distinguished. And then Chomsky quotes Walter Lippmann, and this is what Lippmann was saying in this regard. First, there is the role of the specialized class, the insiders, the responsible men who have access to information and understanding. Ideally, they should have a special education for public office and should master the criteria for solving the problems of society. Does that sound familiar? Chomsky continues to quote Lippmann. Again, here's Lippmann. The public men form opinion and take responsibility for the formation of sound public opinion. They initiate, they administer, they settle, and should be protected from ignorant and meddlesome outsiders. Uh, the ignorant and meddlesome outsiders, of course, is the general public. That's probably you and me. And he continues saying, the general public are incapable of dealing with the substance of the problems. Particularly important to this article, Lippman explains a successful government satisfies the material and cultural wants of the masses. Of course, that material and cultural wants, that is the consumer culture. We're going to return to that sentence shortly. Social engineering is a fence. It is not for the public to pass judgment on the intrinsic merits of an issue or to offer analysis or solution, but merely on occasion to place its force at the disposal of one or another of responsible men. This is Lippman again. The public does not reason, investigate, persuade, bargain, or settle. The public acts only by aligning itself as a partisan to someone who is in position to act in an executive way. The public must be put in its place. The public, the bewildered herd, trampling and roaring, is only to be an interested spectator of action, not to be a participant. That extended quote again was Walter Lippmann. The vision of Bernays and Lippmann describes, of course, is exactly what we have today. It's exactly what we have. And those quotes were from 70, 80, 90 years ago. So this graphic right here is just makes visible what I've just been reading from my article and those quotes from Bernays and Lippmann. Of course, this is my own little fence right here. And this is the social engineering, just several examples of the social engineering that, of course, we're all familiar with, the buying, the entertainment, the internet, which is an awesome tool. It's got pluses and minuses, but it's got a lot of minuses. And of course, suburbia, and there's lots of other examples of these all are sort of chosen of the consumer culture. There's lots more, of course. And then I just use these images to illustrate those, the select, intelligent, the ones who are here to make decisions for the rest of us, of course. That could be in a boardroom. This, of course, is Congress. Of course, these interests often have large financial and economic assets. And then, of course, it's Wall Street as well, this being the stock exchange right here. So this is just to illustrate the point made. Edward Bernays can take a lot of credit for the rise of the consumer culture and by extension, many of the problems we have to deal with at the present time, which are all related to overconsumption of resources and energy. So just let's take a little interesting look at Edward Bernays as a person, a little bit of biography. I just find this interesting too, just a little background. Edward Bernays was born into a well-off family in Austria in 1891. His family moved to the United States when he was just a child in the late 1890s. His mother was Sigmund Freud's sister, and his father was Sigmund Freud's wife's brother. Bernays graduated with a degree in agriculture, but over the 19 teens, he found his way into the commercial world of promotion and advertisement. He built an impressive resume over the course of the 20s to the 60s that included public relation campaigns for Ivory Soap, popularizing serving sized ice cream containers and promoting bananas. But that is only a part of Lippman, of Bernays' resume. Um, it's important to understand Bernays was not a simple advertising executive. His campaigns were to shape public opinion and perceptions. He was making use of his uncle's theories on social behavior. Lippman, uh, Bernays was also known for his promotion of cigarette smoking by women in the 30s. This wasn't just putting out advertisements, this was to shape public opinion. In the 60s, he was also tasked with burnishing and sanitizing the reputation of the new strongman leader of Guatemala, who was installed in 1963 with a CIA coup uh, in Guatemala. So he's definitely into the social political realm of shaping the way people see the world around them. Although it's important, if not ironic, Bernays was not an authoritarian. He and others within his circle believed democracy called for men of means, character, and intellect to be the policy and decision makers of society, while the role of masses was to behave properly. Um, and the reasoning being that if we, those sharing the opinions of Bernays and Lippman and others as well, if they didn't take their altruistic beliefs in democracy and the well-being of society, if they didn't share their organizing and their management, then people who had less altruistic motives would take over and make big problems for society because they wouldn't care so much about the well-being of society and people. So they kind of justified these ideas of social engineering. Yeah. So how do the masses stay happy and distracted? Remember the line from Chomsky's article, the criteria we apply to the success of government is that government satisfies the material and cultural wants of the people. Safe to say, not only does the successful government satisfy the wants of the masses, government is also the patron of social engineering. Political power is based on economic power. Politics and social engineering are intimate partners and oftentimes the same people, of course. Social engineering and foreign policy. We're moving into the foreign policy realm here. Of course, these are the different aspects of media that are uh, the vessels of social engineering. And of course, we have the parking lot, the cars, and the shopping mall. This was just a great graphic I just saw on the internet. I don't know who did it, but it's a great symbol right here. It's a great concept. And of course, an important part of foreign policy is military capacity. The need to keep the general public, the bewildered herd, the masses distracted, converges with the need to maintain a robust, growth-based, hyperactive economic system where the primary function of the masses is to work, buy, and consume, not to decide and make policy. And we can use words, sort of synonyms of the consumer culture, the American dream, manifest destiny, American exceptionalism. These are mythologies and part of the propaganda. To add a bold underline to this assessment, let's hear several paragraphs of quotes that clearly show the convergence between economic need, business profitability, social management, political expediency, and as we'll see momentarily, foreign policy. These four quotes spread over 100 years and show a consistency of historical thinking in terms of what is the purpose of the economy and who is making the decisions. In his groundbreaking book, Propaganda, in 1928, Edward Bernays wrote, "Mass production can be profitable only if its rhythm can be maintained. The business can sell its product in a steady stream and increasing quantity. Today, supply must actively reach its corresponding demand and cannot afford to wait for the public to ask for its product. It must continue constant touch through advertising and propaganda to ensure itself the continuous demand which alone will keep its costly factories and production profitable." That's Bernays in his book, Propaganda. These are basically the blueprint for the consumer culture, is what it is. Victor Liebow, a 20th century economist and retail analyst, remarked in 1955, "Our enormously productive economy demands we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction and our ego satisfaction in consumption. We need things consumed, burned up, discarded, and replaced at an ever accelerating rate." This quote from Stuart Ewan, a contemporary historian, author, and lecturer on media and the consumer culture. He actually interviewed Edward Bernays in the 1990s. Edward Bernays died, I'm not sure his exact age, but he was like 95 or something when he finally died. This is how Ewan describes his conversation with Bernays, and even at a senior age, Bernays apparently was articulate and clear as he had been throughout his public life. This is what Ewan said about Bernays. Throughout our conversation, Bernays conveyed his hallucination with democracy. Of course, Ewan disagrees with Bernays' view on democracy. A highly educated class of opinion-molding tacticians is continuously at work adjusting the mental scenery from which the public mind, with its limited intellect, derives its opinion. So that is Ewan paraphrasing what Bernays is saying. Throughout the interview, Bernays, describes public relations as a response to a trans-historic concern, the requirement from those in power to shape the attitudes of the general population. And finally, we have a more recent quote, a very short quote attributed to former President George Bush, Dick Cheney, and perhaps several others that adds to the previous three remarks. The quote, "The American way of life is non-negotiable." The only way this declaration can be interpreted is that the Americans' lavish excess consumption of energy and resources cannot be challenged. The level of hubris and self-interest here is off the charts. George Bush made this non-negotiating comment at to the world community at the Earth Summit in 1991. This is what George Bush told the world in 1991. The American way of life is non-negotiable at the preeminent environmental global meeting for 1991. That's what Bush said. That's right, the Earth Summit, and of course, the irony is sort of off the charts. The comment is telling the world the U.S. is not interested to stop or even slow down its extreme overconsumption. Even with global relations increasingly unstable thanks to the deepening effects of climate change and much more, the U.S. is not interested to negotiate or diminish its affluence and overconsumption. The primer, that's the primer for paradigm shift, contends unless American eco footprints become far smaller, there will be no solution to any of today's most challenging problems. Social engineering that pushes the consumer culture will only make the deepening problems we're already familiar with even worse. Another enormous irony and conundrum in the global scale, overconsumption by the United States drives much of the world's economy. Global sustainability significantly reducing U.S. and other affluent countries' footprints would put hundreds of millions of people all over the world out of work because hundreds of millions of people all over the world are engaged in products that feed the affluent world, that feed overconsumption. That's a huge problem. And people deserve to have health care and clean water and security. And to a considerable degree, the world does move in a positive direction in that regard. More people do have opportunity than 10, 20, 30 years ago. But to predicate that social and economic uh, improvement on overconsumption is a huge problem. What do we do? Well, a little tangent, permaculture can address some of those issues. And so can the idea of paradigm shift. That is what paradigm shift is about. Overconsumption, cars, suburbia, the consumer culture is the money-making fuel for America's economic and political military power. The more one consumes, the more they contribute to geopolitical and ecological stress. Economic activity produces not only products and services, but also the revenue. Plus, there's a lot of borrowing that goes on in our economy. Of course, the nation's many trillions in debt. But economic activity and overconsumption is a big part of paying the cost for what the government buys, ranging from freeways to tanks and nuclear submarines as well. That's what our overconsumption contributes to. So let's take a look now at foreign policy doctrine. Foreign policy doctrine is basically the act of a nation expressing its interests and opinions to the wider world. For example, it didn't take long after the independence of the United States to project its geopolitical positions beyond its own borders. Foreign policy is based on national security and its intimate companion economic self-interest. And the U.S. is not the only country. Every country has foreign policy doctrines and beliefs. Countries, as we know them, have an interest in safeguarding their interest, the well-being of their people. It's a finite planet, and we're of course seeing more and more competition for what's there with population increase and the economic model put out by the United States of overconsumption, the consumer culture. Much of the world wants to live this way, and it's creating a lot of stress. Of course, we know that. America's geopolitical needs have changed over the past 250 years from the relatively simple turf protection to current needs for importing crude oil, pharmaceuticals, computers, cars, and much more, adding up to $3.8 trillion in imports in 2023. Um, and the U.S. exported about $2 trillion worth of goods and products and services that year. That's a huge budget deficit. Along with other problems, our overconsumption, we're going deeply in debt to afford it, often at the personal level, but also at the national level as well. If the insiders, the tacticians, and men of intellect want to maintain their benign and altruistic control of the U.S. economic and political systems, they need to have global reach to influence and safeguard global trade. If the average consuming American wants to maintain their cars, suburban homes, animal-heavy food choices, fashion, flat-screen TVs, and much more, and all of it to be cheap, global trade is required, and so is the constant means needed to protect that access to products and resources and energy from other parts of the world. The American dream depends on enormous amounts of natural resources from all over the world, and the American dream also depends on the world's largest military to safeguard all those massive container ships and tankers. Many of America's complex interactions with the wider world have been expressed by presidential doctrines going back 200 years. These doctrines show how America has been marking the geopolitical fire hydrant for 2 centuries. The more recent Carter and Reagan and Bush doctrines are predated going back even further into the past. America's self-interest has been expressed going back, of course, to the Monroe Doctrine, which we'll just take a quick look at. So we have historically a precedent and ongoing need to maintain the United States declaring its needs and its wants to the wider world. And of course, in more modern times, there's more competitors to these resources as well. That's why we have an enormous military establishment. So what we want to do is just take a little quick look at some of these foreign policy doctrines, which are oftentimes identified with the president at the time as well. But these give us a glimpse of how the United States sees itself within the context of the broader world. The Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine, expressed in 1823, proclaimed the United States' position that European powers should no longer colonize the Americas, that's the Western Hemisphere, or interfere with the affairs of sovereign states located in the Americas, that's the Western Hemisphere. Who gives the United States the permission to make a statement like that? Well, good question. The Truman Doctrine, the United States is prepared to send money, equipment, or military force to countries that were threatened by or resisting communism. This in 1947. The Cold War, the adversary, the Soviet Union, occupies a lot of the space of these foreign policy doctrines. The Soviet Union was, of course, had a different system and a different take on what the world should be like. Was that idealistic? Was it totalitarian? There have been books written about all of that. Personally, I don't find what the Soviet Union ideal to be attractive either. I can complain and comment about capitalism forever, but it's not, because I would like to see or live in a place like the Soviet Union. I wouldn't want that. There's other choices to be made. That's a lot of what the primer is about. So let's take a look at a few more of these. The Eisenhower Doctrine, these are in chronological order. These are becoming more recent. In 1957, under the Eisenhower Doctrine, a country could request American economic assistance and aid if it was being threatened by armed aggression from another state. And of course, that other state was could often be the Soviet Union. Um, the Nixon Doctrine, 1969, the U.S. would honor all its treaty commitments. The U.S. would provide a shield if a nuclear power threatens the freedom of a nation allied with the U.S., or if a nation whose survival we consider vital to our security. That doesn't necessarily mean a nation that shares the ideals of democracy, as if this country was the role model for that. Again, the Nixon Doctrine. In cases involving other types of aggression, we shall furnish military and economic assistance when requested in according with our treaty commitments, but we shall look at the nation directly threatened to assume the primary responsibility of providing the manpower for its defense. The U.S. would assist in safeguarding our allies and those nations we have economic interest in. The Carter Doctrine, a little more specific. This one, 1980, from Jimmy Carter. He stated the United States would use military force if necessary to defend its national interests in the Persian Gulf. This is actually a very specific. He's basically saying to the Soviet Union at that time in 1980, stay out of the Persian Gulf. That's our turf. Because at that time, and even continuing, the Persian Gulf and all its oil is essential to the global economy, even though at present the U.S. isn't quite so dependent on the Persian Gulf. Lots of countries are. So there's an economic, political interest in the U.S. to protect that area from being interfered with. And of course, the Middle East is a complicated place, and it's just becoming more complicated as well. But that was the U.S. saying to the Soviet Union, stay out of the Middle East, that's our turf. Wow. The Reagan Doctrine, we must not break faith with those who are risking their lives on every continent to defy Soviet aggression and secure rights which have been ours from birth. Again, this is a doctrine pushing back on the Soviet Union and uh, uh, saying, look at our system, this is what we should all be doing, as if our particular economic and political system should be the role model for the world. There's this just high level of um, of both self-interest, but you could say sort of an egotistical, we've got the best system, do what we're doing. And that is a common theme throughout U.S. foreign policy. Um, every nation has self-interest. The wealthier and more powerful the nation, the more able and likely that nation will assert itself on the global stage. These U.S. policy doctrines show the self-interest of the U.S. is at a global scale. So the consumer culture and its foreign policy doctrines is backed up by a military force, uh, by our Navy, Army, Air Force, Marines. Protecting the cars, the tractor pulls, the suburban homes is serious business. As of 2021, the United States has over 700 million positions, 700 military positions of varying size in about 160 countries all over the world. That doesn't mean giant air bases. Some of these uh, positions might only include a dozen Americans. So this isn't to say that there's giant bases in all these different 100 countries. The U.S. military budget is about $800 billion a year, and that is a budget about equal to the next 10 largest militaries combined. The U.S. military is far larger than any other military in the world. The U.S. has over 170,000 troops at all these different locations. So this graphic right here just shows where all these bases, some of the bases are located, and it shows where many of the troops are located um, in terms of troops and military personnel. This graphic from Al Jazeera, and I completely trust their sources. This compares with other types of graphics I've seen about U.S. military force projection all over the world. Of the world's 27 fixed wing aircraft carriers, there's different kinds of aircraft carriers. They're not all created equal. 11 of the world's 27 fixed wing aircraft carriers are in the US Navy. And if you compare the size of those aircraft carriers, in general, the aircraft carriers of the US, those 11 are far larger than other countries, like twice the size, 100,000 tons of displacement. That's like 1,000 feet long, and dozens of fighter jets and the reconnaissance and all the different kind of gear that they have on those aircraft carriers. I just mentioned these bases and just for example, aircraft carriers, just to compare the size of the U.S. military compared to other countries. There are lots of other militaries in the world too. The U.S., of course, is not the only military to have atomic weapons. There's lots of danger out there. Personally, I don't say get rid of all of that stuff, but we need to review what's in our interest and what is it that we're trying to protect. So that's a different story right there. Can Edward Bernays take credit for the socially engineered consumer culture and the $800 billion military budget? Uh, maybe, maybe not. But the fact is that the consumer culture does exist as Bernays and Lippman and others described. It does exist exactly as they describe. And I personally am not a conspiracy person. I don't believe there's a meeting somewhere where a dozen elderly uh, business owners and corporate chiefs and military and politicians get together to discuss how they're uh, choreographing the world. I don't believe that. But there is a logic to capitalism, and the consumer culture in the United States and all over the world too. This is a global phenomenon. It has an enormous momentum. And of course, hundreds and hundreds of millions of people depend on this economic system, depend on overconsumption, and would be very unhappy if they had to downsize. If we have such a huge eco footprint in the United States, would the average American like to uh, reduce their consumption to go from two cars to one, or maybe no car at all, or to share their suburban home with other people? Not very many people would volunteer for that, but considering the trends in the environment and climate change and resources, that's what's called for, a massive reducing in the ecological footprint. The growth-based economic system just cannot continue, and how the world and the United States addresses that issue. We're already seeing the problems that we're creating. And of course, the consumer culture is not designed to be stable and steady, much less reduce its impact on the environment. But people can make changes in their own lives. Is that going to save the situation? I kind of really don't doubt. I doubt if it does. I don't think there's really any way out of our current overconsumption and global trade and the militaries. I think that uh, a term that many are beginning to use, the poly crisis, is is increasing. It's the frog in the saucepan with the heat of the water going up. Uh, but again, we can make changes and be examples and pioneers for something better in our own lives without necessarily being too attached to being successful and having the rest of the world follow our example. It's just the right thing to do. There's the concerns for the environment and uplift of the human spirit. If you believe there's a reason for us being here, is to become better people, more compassionate and more caring for each other. There's got to be a reason we're here. And I'm not a religious person either. So the important message from this article and the primer is that our society, our individual lives, and everyday reality has been remarkably shaped to fit the needs of political and economic interests that are often at odds with our own interests. That reality comes to us most visibly as the consumer culture and its near infinite shallow distractions and immense ecological footprints. The incessant full court press of commercial lifestyle worldview messaging teaches us buying, consuming, and vanity are the primary goals of life, and our system and government is there to protect those that those ideas. The consumer culture requires levels of resource and energy consumption that are causing severe damage to the natural world, each of us as individuals and social well-being. We are all affected. Climate change, water, air, soil pollution, and many other severe forms of damage to the environment are a direct result of humans simply consuming too much. And just as important, the consumer culture and its growth-based economic system distracts and degrades positive human potential and our own capacity to act in our own best interests. We are referred to and see ourselves as consumers rather than citizens and human beings, each of us with our own unique and positive potentials and capacities to make common cause with others for the good of people and planet. The take-home message, I will leave that to you. That's the basic summation. So again, I just want to close with this here. Um, I mentioned there are many examples of people as individuals, of small groups, ad hoc organizations that are absolutely pointing the way to a preferred future. I love these stories, and that's what most of the primer is about, is what are people actually doing in the real world. Uh, this picture here is my backyard. This is, I've been transforming my suburban property for 25 years. I grow almost all my own fruit and vegetables. This is what my place used to look like here. Um, and then this is kind of idealized. Imagine, like I said, I'm very interested in urban land use, turning suburban shopping malls into micro downtowns by building higher density residential and commercial on those parking lots. Of course, there's dead shopping malls. Somewhat examples of this already happening here and there, but build on those parking lots and make these attractive places to be with higher density, uh, improved access from nearby streets to make them more walkable, to make them more bikeable, uh, public transportation. That's a whole other realm right there. I'm very interested in. This picture here is a place I know of in Portland, Oregon, Kailash Eco Village. Um, it is one of the best stories I know of taking a rundown, drug-infested apartment complex and turning it into an eco village. You can kind of see there, these are all gardens and solar right here. And then even more recently, the people engaged here have bought this apartment complex here, which was also run down, and that is also going to become an eco village. There must be thousands of apartment complexes all over the country that could be turned into eco villages. People can make money transforming underused, neglected real estate into something positive. Might not make a lot of money, but people can make a living. The paradigm shift economy will create new jobs, but they're going to be much more modest in paying as well, along with the ideal that we need to reduce our eco footprints. This is a schematic. You probably can't see it real well, but you can go to their website. This is local 2020 in Port Townsend, Washington State. And Port Townsend, a town of about 20,000. I wish we had this kind of organization in Eugene, but just a wonderful public interest organization that is with the purpose of reducing eco footprints, becoming more, produce more needs locally, build culture, support the local economy as well. Local 2020 in Port Townsend, they have this image on their website. And here's their website right down here. I've spent a good deal of time in Europe. This is a fascinating place in Freiburg, Germany. This is the Vauban neighborhood. This isn't the whole town. It's 1,400 people live in the Vauban neighborhood. It used to be a French army base. The French left and uh, and and there was this space that could see new, different kind of use than an army base. The city of Freiburg decided to build a neighborhood that would discourage the use of automobiles. You can have a car if you live in the Vauban neighborhood, but you have to keep it in a city parking garage and pay a lot of money. You can't park cars in the neighborhood. You can make a delivery in the neighborhood, but you can't leave the car there. It has to go back to the city parking garage. And maybe you can see this is a tram right here. A tram goes right through the middle of the neighborhood. And of course, it shows up every 8 minutes. You don't need a schedule. You just go out there and wait for the tram, and it takes you into town. I've done that. I've spent a little bit of time here in the Vauban neighborhood. It's a great place for kids. Kids can wander around all over because there's essentially little, if any, traffic. And of course, one of my favorite locations here in Barcelona, I took this picture right here. Okay, it's kids kicking a soccer ball. There's people on these chairs reading. There's people talking with each other. There's trees. It's quiet, it's kind of a nice place. It's very urban, of course. This is all pavement. It's very urban. But what is the remarkable history of this particular place right here? It used to be a busy, noisy, crowded, polluted automobile intersection. This park used to be an automobile intersection in high density Barcelona, Spain. Barcelona, the city, has a urban mobility plan to make the quality of life in Barcelona better for the people who live there. And the most well-known aspect of that plan is called superblocks. So, and that is an effort to reduce the use and the need for automobiles and to improve air quality, improve quality of life in Barcelona. This is just one of the best stories I know. It's in the early going, but there are already a couple dozen of these types of intersections of transformation in Barcelona. You can do a search for superblocks Barcelona and you can find out more. So, and you can find out more about Paradigm Shift. You can search my name, Paradigm Shift, on YouTube. You can find the articles that I've written at this address right here, Resilience Magazine. You can go to my website, Suburban Permaculture. Oops, I misspelled that. Let me just do a little edit right here. .org. Um, so, well, I'll leave that till later. Suburbanpermaculture.org is my website, and I have podcasts on my website as well. So I am going to say I'm finished with this presentation. I would encourage you to share it with others. I hope this has been interesting. I hope it empowers you as well, you know, that this adds to your own menu of topics and issues that you can use when you're talking with other people, because I just find this the origin of the consumer culture, how it came about, and it takes this enormous military. It it is not democratic. Uh, it it diminishes our capacities to manifest our own individual potentials. There's just not really a whole lot you can say about it. So, in a positive way. So, I thank you for your attention, and I will go from here back to here and wish you a pleasant day. And you can contact me through my website also. So, enough said.